Welcome to the GRC and Information Security Governance Mastery course. Over the chapters ahead, we'll build a complete, practical picture of governance, risk, and compliance work covering the frameworks, assessments, audits, documentation, stakeholder management and certifications that define this field. In summary, built for hands-on GRC, InfoSEC governance and data protection professionals, from frameworks to audits to certifications, a practical walkthrough, not just theory. GRC brings together three connected disciplines. Governance sets direction and holds people accountable. Risk management identifies and treats uncertainty before it becomes a problem. Compliance makes sure the organization actually meets its legal, regulatory, and contractual obligations. In summary, governance, setting direction and accountability; risk, identifying and treating uncertainty; compliance, meeting legal, regulatory, and contractual obligations. These two disciplines overlap but aren't identical. Information security governance protects the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of all information assets. Data protection governance narrows that focus specifically to personal and sensitive data, often driven by privacy law. In summary, InfoSEC governance protects confidentiality, integrity, and availability of all information assets. Data protection governance focuses specifically on personal and sensitive data. Both need policy, oversight, and measurable controls. Mature governance runs on three lines of defense. The first line, operational management, owns the risk day to day. The second line, the GRC and compliance function, sets policy and monitors it. The third line, internal audit, gives leadership independent assurance that it's all working. In summary, line 1, operational management, owns the risk; line 2, GRC and compliance functions set policy and monitor; line 3, internal audit gives independent assurance. Frameworks exist so that security and compliance work isn't reinvented from scratch every time. They give everyone a common language for controls, and they map cleanly onto legal and contractual requirements. Knowing how to work across more than one framework at once is one of the most valuable GRC skills there is. In summary, a framework gives a common language for controls, frameworks map to legal and contractual requirements. Mixing frameworks well is a core GRC skill. The National Cybersecurity Authority's essential cybersecurity controls set the baseline for government and critical national entities. They span governance, cyber defense, resilience, and third-party and cloud security, and entities are required to self-assess against every domain. In summary, Saudi NCA's baseline for government and critical entities covers governance, defense, resilience, third-party, and cloud, mandatory self-assessment against ECC domains. The data cybersecurity controls extend the ECC baseline specifically into data protection. They cover how data is classified, handled, stored, and shared, and they apply across the full life cycle of the data, not just at rest. In summary, extends ECC specifically to data protection, covers data classification, handling, storage and sharing, applies across the full data life cycle. The NIST cybersecurity framework organizes work into 6 functions. It's outcome-based rather than prescriptive, which is exactly why it's so widely used to benchmark maturity across very different organizations. In summary, 6 functions: govern, identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, outcome-based, not prescriptive controls, widely used to benchmark maturity. SP 800-53 is the detailed control catalog that sits underneath the higher-level CSF. Its controls are organized into families: access control, audit and accountability, incident response, risk assessment, and more, and it's used heavily in U.S. federal and government assessments. In summary, detailed control catalog underneath the CSF, organized into families like AC, O, IR, RA, used heavily in U.S. federal and government assessments. ISO/IEC 27001 requires a certifiable information security management system, built on the Plan Do Check Act cycle of continual improvement. The main clauses set the management requirements, while Annex A detailed further in ISO 27002 supplies the actual control set. In summary, requires a certifiable information security management system, Plan Do Check Act continual improvement cycle, Annex A and ISO 27002 controls support the requirements clauses. The statement of applicability is the central artifact of any ISO 27001 ISMS. It lists every Annex A control, states whether it's applicable or excluded, and justifies that decision, which is exactly why every auditor starts by reading it. In summary, central artifact of any ISO 27001 ISMS, lists every Annex A control, applicable or excluded, with justification. Auditors always start here. NCA, NIST, and ISO 27001 pursue the same underlying goals through different structures and terminology. A well-designed control can often satisfy 2 or 3 of these frameworks simultaneously, and being able to cross-map them is one of the highest value skills in multi-framework organizations. In summary, same underlying goals, different structure and terminology, a single control can often satisfy 2 or 3 frameworks at once. Cross-mapping is a high-value skill for multi-framework organizations. A compliance assessment asks whether the organization is meeting a specific framework's requirements. A control gap assessment goes further, asking exactly where controls fall short and by how much. Together, they feed a single prioritized remediation roadmap. In summary, compliance assessment, are we meeting a specific framework's requirements? Gap assessment, where do our controls fall short, and by how much? Both feed a prioritized remediation roadmap. An internal audit moves through a clear life cycle: plan, fieldwork, reporting, and follow-up. It stays independent from the teams being audited, and every finding is rated by risk rather than treated as a simple pass or fail. In summary, plan, fieldwork, reporting, then follow-up, independent from the teams being audited, findings are rated by risk, not just non-conformance. Certification audits run in stages. Stage 1 reviews documentation and readiness. Stage 2 tests whether controls are genuinely implemented and effective. After certification, annual surveillance audits confirm the ISMS is still being maintained. In summary, Stage 1, documentation review; Stage 2, full implementation review. Surveillance audits keep the certificate valid year over year. Good evidence is dated, attributable to a specific person or system, and repeatable on demand. A screenshot or export alone rarely survives scrutiny. Every control needs a clear owner and a documented evidence source behind it. In summary, evidence must be dated, attributable, and repeatable. Screenshots and exports are not enough on their own. Map every control to its owner and evidence source. Governance documentation follows a clear hierarchy. Policy sets the what and why, owned by leadership. Standards set the mandatory how much, specific thresholds and requirements. Procedures spell out the step-by-step how, owned by the operational teams that actually do the work. In summary, policy, the what and why, set by leadership; standard, the mandatory how much or specific requirement; procedure, the step-by-step how, owned by operations. Documentation that survives an audit has version control, a named owner, and a review date on every page. Its language traces cleanly to real evidence, and its review cycle is set by risk, not just defaulted to once a year. In summary, version control, owner, and review date on every document. Language auditors can trace to actual evidence, review cycle aligned to risk, not just annually by default. Government and semi-government projects raise the bar. Regulatory scrutiny is higher, framework adoption like NCA is often mandatory, and approval chains and sign-off cycles run longer and more formally than in the private sector. In summary, higher regulatory scrutiny and mandatory framework adoption, formal approval chains and longer sign-off cycles, national data residency and classification requirements often apply. In a public sector engagement, your stakeholders include regulators, not just internal leadership. Reporting cadence is often formally mandated rather than negotiated, and confidentiality and clearance requirements are noticeably stricter. In summary, stakeholders include regulators, not just internal leadership. Reporting cadence is often formally mandated, confidentiality and clearance requirements are stricter. Leading a stakeholder discussion means translating technical risk into business language. Different audiences need different levels of detail, and real remediation comes from facilitating a conversation, not just handing over a report. In summary, translate technical risk into business language. Different stakeholders need different levels of detail. Facilitation, not just reporting, drives real remediation. Audit coordination means being the single point of contact between auditors and business units. You manage evidence requests, timelines, and escalations, keeping the audit moving without burying control owners in requests. In summary, single point of contact between auditors and business units, manage evidence requests, timelines, and escalations, keep the audit moving without overwhelming control owners. Leadership needs dashboards, not dense spreadsheets. Track the trend in gap count and remediation velocity, not just a point-in-time status, and always escalate risk-accepted items explicitly instead of letting them disappear into a report. In summary, dashboards over dense spreadsheets for executives, trend the gap count and remediation velocity, not just point-in-time status, escalate risk-accepted items explicitly, don't bury them. A good governance workshop puts control owners and risk owners in the same room. Use real findings instead of hypotheticals to drive engagement, and never end a workshop without owned, dated actions on the table. In summary, bring control owners and risk owners into the same room, use real findings, not hypotheticals, to drive engagement, and every workshop with owned, dated actions. The lead auditor certification qualifies you to lead external certification audits, while lead implementer qualifies you to build and run an ISMS from the ground up. Both are built directly on the Plan Do Check Act cycle at the heart of ISO 27001. In summary, lead auditor qualifies you to lead external certification audits, lead implementer qualifies you to build and run an ISMS, both build directly on the Plan Do Check Act cycle. CISP gives broad security practitioner depth across 8 domains. ISMS shifts the focus to security management and governance. CRISC centers specifically on risk, while GRC is built directly around governance, risk, and compliance. In summary, CISP, broad security practitioner depth across 8 domains, CISM, security management and governance focus, CRISC is risk-centric, GRC is governance, risk, and compliance specific. Frameworks give governance its structure, and assessments and audits prove that structure is actually working. Documentation and stakeholder management are what make it sustainable day to day, and the right certifications simply validate what real, hands-on experience already demonstrates. In summary, frameworks give structure, assessments and audits prove it's working, documentation and stakeholder management make governance sustainable, certifications validate what your experience already demonstrates.